Patricia Cushing.
Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Our commemoration, a special you're seeing on the screen for the radio audience out there. Want to describe what's going on. You're seeing the hits of the radical Islamic terrorist that triggered the bloodiest day in American history, September 11th of 2001, a day that will live in infamy for what they did, but the heroism and sacrifice of the men and women of New York is absolutely extraordinary. So you're seeing the planes. You don't see this footage much anymore. We should show it every day, but you're seeing it right here, the two towers being hit on what was a Canadian high, beautiful September day, absolutely stunning, not a cloud in the sky, dry air, just absolutely magnificent. And you're seeing this footage. We're playing footage throughout this commemoration special all day. We're going to have everybody from Mayor Rudy Giuliani. We're going to try to track down. He's out and about at all these commemorative ceremonies. We got Buck Sexton, Sam Faddis from the CIA, Bo Dietl, NYPD, and Scott Neal, who's one of the horse soldiers who went over to Afghanistan to actually set things right with the people that did this, the Taliban and Osama bin Laden's team. This footage is horrific, and America should embrace it. It's the bloodiest day in American history, bloodiest day on our soil. We're going to go at 10:03. We're going to have a moment of silence because in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Flight 93 is about to hit impact at, I think, at Mach 1 or 2, just hurtling into the earth. So at 10:03, in about a few seconds, we're going to have a 1-minute moment of silence. Pennsylvania, the President of the United States will actually be in Shanksville. He will be speaking on America's Voice.news, the streaming service at Dish Channel 219 of the Trump Revolution. We will go to Shanksville to try to get some of that. I think it's going to be in the 11 o'clock hour. Packed show today. Plus, we're going to have news of what's going on in this new attack on America by the CCP virus. I'm honored now to be this show is so honored to start off with one of the true American heroes. He was the NYPD police commissioner, Bernie Kerik, and became an American legend, American hero that day. He and Rudy Giuliani, and of course many others. Commissioner Kerik, Bernie, can you put us in To take us back to that day, tell us what happened. Tell us what your first reactions were. You rose to the occasion and became an American hero that day. So walk us through exactly what happened.
When the first tower was hit, I was actually in my office, so my staff came in and told me that a plane had just hit Tower 1. And I went to my conference room window, and I could see the damage to the building. I called the mayor. I told the mayor that I would meet him at our emergency command center, which is in 7 World Trade across from Tower 1. I got down there within about 7 or 8 minutes. And when I arrived, we actually couldn't get into the building because people were jumping from the top of Tower 1 and they were landing on Vesey Street between Tower 1 and 2. I waited for the mayor, and about 3 minutes before he actually arrived, the second plane slammed through the north side of the tower of Tower 2 on top of us, on top of me and my staff, the deputy mayor that was with me. And we actually had to run up the street behind the federal building to get out of the way as the debris from the building and the plane came down on top of us.
What was your immediately you guys went into command mode? What was the very first things that you talked to the mayor about how do you get a hold of this situation? You've seen 2 unprecedented attacks with major airlines flying into the 2, tallest buildings in the world. What were the first commands? Walk us through the process of what you, in that moment, decided to do.
Well, I didn't realize we were under attack until the second plane hit the second building. At that point, I realized what was going on when I heard the aviation pilots yelling that a second airliner had just hit Tower 2. And keep in mind, from 1996 on, Rudy Giuliani, the mayor, had put together the Office of Emergency Management. And we had plans and protocols and policies to respond to every kind of emergency you could imagine, with the exception, and obviously nobody ever imagined that somebody would fly these large-scale missiles into buildings. But we had plans and policies in place for massive responses by the NYPD, by the FDNY, and as well, we have responses from, the EMTs, the Department of Correction, the Port Authority Police. So we had a massive, contingency of first responders on the scene within minutes. And from that point forward, there were 2 issues. One, to ensure the city was safe, because we didn't know if there were more attacks planned. We didn't know if they had ground attacks planned. We didn't know if there were people on the ground. But we also had to start a rescue mission for possible survivors, which unfortunately for us, there were not many.
Bernie, let me ask you, when you're there, you see the first one hit from your conference room, get downtown, you're actually there, people are jumping out of the building already, you get there, the other one's hit while you're there, you realize it's an attack. As you guys process this, did you have a leap of imagination or anybody, I know there was a focus on how do we save people, how do we get above where those things were hit, and how we get people out of the building. When did it dawn on you or anybody in the command structure that those buildings could actually collapse? Was that something that people talked about, worried about, or that when it happened, and that was something that caught everybody by surprise?
Steve, that's a really good question because nobody, the mayor and I, when the mayor arrived about 3 minutes after the second plane hit Tower 2, him and I walked down to West Street and met with the senior management of the fire department on West Street for about 10 minutes, and then we left, went to 75 Barclay Street where he tried to call the White House. Unfortunately, everybody that was there at that temporary command post that we had just left, when Tower 2 imploded, they all perished. And that was the first deputy commissioner of the fire department, the chief of department, the chief of operations. These were the most experienced men in the country in fire response operations, and all of them agreed that we would lose everything above the impact zone. We would lose that part of the building. We would lose the people north of the attack of the impact zone, higher than that. But no one thought that the buildings would actually come down. And I think what they underestimated was that these aircraft were loaded with more than 50,000 gallons of jet fuel, and the heat that caused temperatures in excess of 1,500 to 2,000 degrees, once it started to sway the metal, these beams that the buildings were made out of, there was nothing under there to hold them. But once it started to implode from the top, they came straight down. Honestly, luckily for us, because if they had not come straight down, instead of 2,500 being killed, we would have lost about 25,000.
Bernie, you're the first probably senior guy on the scene. You meet the mayor. You guys always talk in the White House. Tell our audience, what was the first moment that Bernie Kerik internally thought, this may be my last day on Earth?
Honestly, I wasn't really thinking like that until we were inside 75 Barclay. The mayor was on the phone. He was trying to get the vice president, and he hung up the phone in the middle of his conversation with somebody in the White House, and he looked at me and he said, this is not good. And he said, I think they just said that they think the Pentagon got hit. And as he said that, before I could even gather my train of thought on what he was talking about, the building we were in started to shake like a freight train was coming through the side of it. And what was happening was that Tower 2 was imploding on top of us and around us. So we wound up trapped inside there for about 30 minutes, 25 or 30 minutes. And I can remember thinking then, during that time, all the stuff I've done in my career, gun battles, getting stabbed, the craziness in my career, I'm going to wind up suffocating in this room because we could not breathe. But eventually, after about 20, 25 minutes, we got out of there.
Bernie, by the way, we'd like, if you can, I know you're incredibly busy. We'd love you to stay over for part of the next segment because people have already blown us up about questions they want to ask you. Let me ask you, after the first tower came down, then you realized that this absolutely could happen, that the towers could actually implode. How did you pivot then in the thinking about what do we do now that we realize that one of the second tower is going to collapse at some point in time? How did you change the command, not structure, but how did you change your command process of what you guys were thinking of doing?
Well, honestly, Steve, keep in mind that the senior management of the fire department had been killed. The fire commissioner was actually with me and the mayor, and the ground commanders then called for the evacuation of Tower 1. But I have to be honest, and I've said this over the years, we lost so many people that heard the evacuation orders. We lost people that were there and watched Tower 2 implode. They knew that Tower 1 could come down. They knew the perils inherent with what they were doing, but they didn't leave. They ran back into those buildings. They ran to the outskirts of the buildings to continue to remove the civilians and also to look for possible survivors and brothers and sisters in uniform that probably died as a result of Tower 2.
Where does that come from? Where does it, the thing that amazed, I think, America and the world was they ran towards the crisis. And, in the weeks and months following, you saw those funerals every day. You saw them in the New York Times front page with a thing. I tell you what, Bernie, we've only got a minute left. I want to hold that question until we get back. Where does that courage come from? Where did that come from? I want everybody in hashtag War Room Pandemic. I want to hear your comments, your questions as a commemoration of 9/11, of the bloodiest day in American history. We've got the police commissioner at the time, Bernie Kerik, one of the true heroes of that day. The the sidekick to Mayor Giuliani that got us through that day and got us through the days ahead. Okay, we're going to take a short commercial break. Raheem, can you take us out? You got the clock. We're going to take a short commercial break in the live stream. I want to hear all of your comments. # War Room Pandemic. We're going to return in a moment with Bernie Kerik, the police commissioner, on the day in 9/11, 2001.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. Thank you. And from here in the War Room, just thank you to Mr. Kerik for joining us and holding over the line for the next segment. Buck Sexton will also be joining us. Scott Neal, Bo Dietl, Sam Faddis, Mayor Giuliani. We'll be right back with more War Room Pandemic in just a second.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back on the John Fredericks Radio Network on America's Voice.News. That's Dish Channel 219 on Newsmax TV, now in 70 million homes, and of course in Mandarin on GTV and G News throughout the world. Now also with our podcast with over 14 million downloads. So I want to thank everybody. Very special day, special program. I want to thank all of our distribution partners for helping us put this together. You're seeing footage you probably haven't seen in a while since mainstream media won't play a lot of this. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's a day of heroes and heroism here on this show. We're going to walk through everybody from Buck Sexton to Sam Faddis to Scott Neal, one of the horse soldiers, Mayor Giuliani. But we want to get back to one of the true heroes, New York Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik at the time. Bernie, 19 years ago, in about 10 or 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, we're going to have a moment of silence for the North Tower coming down. The question I think a lot of people have is, where did that come from? Where did that courage come from that NYPD the fire department, emergency services, everybody, they ran towards the crisis, right? They ran towards the crisis. Where did that come from? Where does it?
Steve, I think that people don't realize that that's what they do on a daily basis, right? You have cops in New York City that work in some real hot spots, gunfire on a daily basis, assaults, attacks, stabbings. What happens? People call the police, they respond, and they run toward that gunfire. They don't care, what color their victims are. They don't care what religion they are. Doesn't make any difference. They go to do a job that most people wouldn't have the courage to do. On this day, 19 years ago, there's no way you could look at what was going on and not seriously question whether you were going to make it out alive. But they did it anyway. And unfortunately, I lost 23 people that work for me. We lost 37 Port Authority cops. And we lost 343 firefighters, and we have lost hundreds since. But you know what? Nobody questioned the orders. Nobody ran. They did what they were supposed to do, and they did it better than anybody has done it in this entire country. They effected the greatest rescue mission in American history.
Bernie, do you think that the country overall, did we forget 9/11 too quickly, not just with the wars and not in Afghanistan, but Iraq? We're still in Afghanistan, but do we commemorate this in the right way? Is this as big a moment as it should be? Do you think the country, the country came together immediately afterwards, but do you think the country, particularly going through this concept now of defund the police and all this kind of thing, but do you think the country really understands the lessons? And not just the lessons of radical Islamic terrorism that hit us, but the lessons of what it takes to actually combat this and the kind of inner fortitude you have to have.
You know what? I think most of the country, I think 80 to 85% of the country, I think they support the police. I think they understand what first responders do and they appreciate their service. But there is a major movement in this country that you talk about constantly, and that's this socialist/communist push by radical Marxists that wants the demise of the country that we know. And, they want the elimination of our Constitution. They want things that has really caused the demise of other countries. So there's this big push, to diminish public service, to, villainize the police, to victimize the thugs. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing today. But I think, for the most part, 80 to 85% of the American public, they still have an appreciation for what public servants do and how they put their lives on the line for the American people.
Bernie, you put your life on the line for this city every day of your service in the NYPD. I've been back here now for a couple of days after Labor Day. I'm absolutely stunned. New York City's kind of zombie land. My breath's taken away because I've lived in New York on and off since I got out of the Navy back in the 80s, out of Harvard. And I've never seen it like this. I mean, this is actually worse, I think, than the days after 9/11. I mean, in 9/11, it did start to pick up as people had the courage to come back, and the first responders and the police were still there. But tell us today what is going on in New York City? I mean, even after the horrific attack on New York, where people were afraid the next couple of days something else was going to happen, the city did come back to life. You did see that kind of grit, determination. You did see that energy. And New York, the comeback in New York, I think, stunned the world. But there's something not right now. I can't put my finger on it, but and I'd like to have your opinion since you've really dedicated your life to the city.
You know what, Steve? This is a true story, what I'm going to tell you. The mayor and I met with President Bush on the 14th of September. And we jumped in the motorcade with him, and we were going to the Javits Center so he could see the families. And we were looking out the window, and there were thousands upon thousands of people with George Bush signs, God bless America, all of this unity. And the president looked out the window of the motorcade, and he said, "This is great, all these people supporting us." And Giuliani looked at him and started laughing. He said, "You know what, Mr. President? It's kind of weird to see because not one of those people voted for you. We're on the west side of Manhattan. And everybody laughed. But you know what? He was right. There was a unity that I had never seen before, and I have not seen since. Today, we couldn't get that unity to save our lives, and here's why. Because we now have mayors and governors and city council members in communities and cities and states that are Marxists, that are these left-wing, radical, militant supporters that want the demise of this country. They've wound up in these positions, and they are the political leadership, which is exactly why you have the highest violence and murder and crime rates in Democratic-run cities like Seattle, Portland, Atlanta, Minneapolis. That's what's going on, and that's why we don't see that kind of support.
Bernie, before we let you go, we got a couple of minutes before the moment of silence. Can what if you had to talk to America about the lessons of 9/11, the lessons of the heroism of NYPD and the fire department and first responders? What should be that lesson today? What should America take away from the tragedy of 9/11?
Never take life for granted. Never take your daily routine for granted, because you could be here today and gone tomorrow. There were 3,000 people that died that day that the night before had no idea their world was coming to an end. Love your kids. Love your country. But, give your support to the men and women that go out there and do a job that nobody else wants to do. And this country would be a lot better off. Thank you, guys.
Bernie, thank you very much. It's Bernie Kerik, who was the New York Police Commissioner on the day of 9/11, and Rudy Giuliani's partner in handling the dilemma, the crisis that day, and then going forward. Thank you, Bernie. In about a minute and a half, we're going to bring in Buck Sexton now. Buck, in about a minute and a half, we're going to go to a moment of silence. But I want to make sure, because when we come back to the moment of silence, we're going to go to your story. You're a New York City guy, but you're also part of the NYPD intelligence unit. You're a former guy with the CIA. You've had a very varied career, and you know a lot of different aspects of all of this. So when we get back, Buck, thank you for joining us. And when we come back, Buck, I want to hear your story of 9/11. Tell us about that right now. We got about a minute.
Well, it changed my life like it did so many others. I went into the CIA's counterterrorism center right out of college because of 9/11. It happened when I was in my sophomore year, and on that day, I just vowed I'm going to get in the fight in some way. I thought the CIA was the best way for me. That would be where I could make my contribution, and then that led to tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and then after that, working for the NYPD Intelligence Division. Steve, I was going to be a Wall Street guy probably if it wasn't for 9/11, but they attacked my city, and I wasn't going to let it go.
Buck, hang on for 1 second. 19 years ago, in about 10 seconds, the North Tower came down. The second major tragedy on that day, totally unexpected, as Bernie Kerik just told us. So we're going to go to a moment of silence. We'll return in 60 seconds. I want to thank our radio audience for hanging on. The AVN's had tremendous footage. Here in New York City right now, you can hear the bells. We're in Midtown Manhattan. You can hear the bells throughout the church bells right across from St. Patrick's. You can hear the bells ringing It's 19 years ago at this moment the North Tower started to come down. Buck, we got about 2 minutes till we go to got a minute till we go to break. In fact, Buck, we're gonna come back and do the whole interview. We'll come back. I want to thank you for hanging with us, Buck Sexton, who was inspired as a young person in college to go into the CIA to get into the fight. He ran to the sound of the gunfire. Later, NYPD intelligence unit that kept the city safe for so many years, really decades, done an extraordinary job. Raheem, back to you. Take us out. We'll come to Buck Sexton. Then we got one of the horse soldiers, Scott Neal. A Day of Heroes.
Yeah, we'll come back to you, Steve and Buck, in just a second. Hashtag War Room Pandemic for all your thoughts and comments and questions. We'll be right back.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
19 years ago today, the bloodiest day in American history happened on American soil right here in New York City, the greatest city in the world, in Lower Manhattan, attacked by radical Islamic jihadists. That is still going on today. The court case, I think, was just ruled yesterday that Saudi Arabia, certain guys in Saudi Arabia have to testify in the government as this now goes on to this 19th year for the victims. Got a Day of Heroes here. I want to go to Buck Sexton. Buck, you were a sophomore in college. Tell us about the impact when you saw what was happening to your city and why it inspired you to join the CIA and then later the NYPD intelligence unit.
Like everybody else, I never forget that day and what happened. I was actually out of New York because I was in college up in Massachusetts. My whole family was down here, though. My mom, dad, brothers, and sister, they're all New York City people, too. And I remember going into class like so many other folks around my age, and a professor said, and this was the classic story. The professor said, "We believe a plane has hit one of the World Trade Centers," but he seemed grave about it. I mean, it seemed like it was more than something small. Went back to my room and turned on the TV, and sure enough, I actually watched in real time as the second plane hit. It was that soon for me to get back to the room that I saw it happen. And I remember I said out loud, "We're going to war." I didn't know with who. I didn't know. I had a bunch of friends with me at the time. And I was particularly concerned. I had an uncle who worked for Aon Corporation. For those that know the history of 9/11 New York City well, Aon lost the second most people after Cantor Fitzgerald. I think Cantor Fitzgerald was the single greatest loss of life for any company in the towers. Aon was number 2. My uncle lost his secretary. He lost all of his colleagues, basically. It was obviously a total disaster and a tragedy. I didn't know that he survived until later on that day. The president of the college gave me a call. And there's one other thing I just want to throw out there for everybody, because it was a day when we realized who our enemies were overseas, but also a day when you realize what the left's ideology was here at home. Steve and Raheem and crew, I remember we had our only ever all-school assembly that day. This is at a college up in central Massachusetts. And one of the professors, this was supposed to be a healing moment, because classmates of mine lost parents, lost siblings, and they bring us all together, and a professor stands up in front of the entire assembled school and says, "Well, now we see what happens when you make people angry on the day of 9/11, and then proceeded to give the usual lecture about U.S. imperialism and our foreign policy. And that was also when I recognized we have no space really here for some of the ideas that unfortunately have become pervasive on the left. And the blame America first policy was unavoidable after that to recognize that this resided on the left. So it was a political awakening as well as a national security awakening.
So you had a personal awakening. I mean, you dedicated yourself then to get into the fight. You went to the CIA. Tell us about that. But I also want to know, when at that moment, on that day, 19 years ago, when you decided, hey, we're going to war, and I'm going to go to war in some aspect of this to make sure that I serve my country, I serve my countrymen. Walk us through, did you think that 19 years later we'd still be in Afghanistan and still rooting out terrorists in Afghanistan?
I mean, I remember thinking, first off, I remember thinking that this was what I wanted to do, that the CIA, to me, just given my background, believe it or not, I was in Arabic class before 9/11. I just had an interest in the Middle East and had studied Mideast politics already on my own for a number of years. So I had a little bit of a jump start in trying to get to the CIA and spending time at various think tanks and policy institutes right away. So that was why I decided to go the intelligence route instead of going into the military at that time, which I was also considering. It just seemed like an easier pathway for me. But I remember thinking, Steve, if I don't get out there, if I don't get into this fight soon, I'm going to miss it. You know, we're going to get bin Laden in the next 6 months. And I'm being really, because I had 2 years of school left. But to get through the process and everything else with the CIA certainly took a long time, even though it was the first thing I did in college. Sure enough, here we are, still in Afghanistan, still in Iraq. I mean, the mission creep is obvious. I think the president's instincts on this to try and do everything he can is correct, up to and including taking risks. Look, there's never going to be a removal, a withdrawal of all U.S. troops from war zones. These are still unstable places. It's not, people compare it to Japan and Germany. It's a silly comparison. These are countries where there are still enemy factions taking ground, or our allies on the ground are taking casualties. It's time to end those wars. This is no longer really about defeating bin Laden and al-Qaeda. This is something else now. And I saw it happening when I was in Afghanistan in 2010, and I was saying, we need to get out of here. This is never going to work. And everyone that I knew who knew that issue well, I mean, I was briefing the 4-star in theater on a regular basis. Everybody that I was talking to knew Afghanistan was saying, we keep doing the same mission that's going to work in 12 months, every 12 months. Really more like every 6 to 9 months. Wasn't working then, and it's not going to work now.
Bob, before we leave, you came back and you worked with one of the most unsung elite units in our country, if not the world, the NYPD intelligence unit. It kept this city safe under Ray Kelly and others. this special unit that was set up by Mayor Giuliani, I think Brad, and then Ray Kelly even took it to the next level. I think you guys stopped 14 major terror attacks, I think the number is. Tell us briefly, I only got a couple of minutes, but tell us briefly about the NYPD intelligence unit and the unsung heroes there.
It's a fantastic group, and largely driven by just the sense of mission. I mean, everybody who works for that unit, this is their town. And so when you're reading about a plot, it's one thing to be in Kandahar. I mean, obviously you got to take care of the mission there too, but it's another thing when it's the subway system that you or perhaps your wife and kids are using every day. And that was, for example, under assault with Najibullah Zazi trying to build backpack bombs that kill as many people as possible in the New York City subway. My unit took care of that. Chasing down Faisal Shahzad after trying to blow up Times Square. I think people now forget how many mass casualty attack efforts were underway in the years after 9/11. A number of them were foiled by the work of the JTTF and the NYPD Intelligence Division. And we're very lucky because of that sense of mission, Steve, what you had were some of the best from the 40,000 plus strong NYPD coming together in Intel and also in CTD. And you also brought in people like me from the federal side who had particular experience in counterterrorism, but they wanted to focus on that mission of protecting the biggest terrorist target in the world, the 5 boroughs of New York. And so it was quite an experience to be there, and it was just whatever way all of us felt we could give back a little bit, because we were always reminded of the real heroes from 9/11, the people in the NYPD and the FDNY who ran into those towers. And that's motivating every day. Every day you remember that.
Buck, I want to thank you. Can we get your Twitter handle? I know the audience already wants to get more information about you. Can you give us your Twitter handle so we can get more access to you?
Sure, Steve. At Buck Sexton, everybody. Please do give me a follow, and thank you all for your time.
Buck, fantastic. You're an American hero. Thank you, sir. Want to turn now. We've got on the line the individual became a world figure that day, the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. Mayor Giuliani, thank you for joining us here on War Room Pandemic.
Oh, it's an honor to be with you.
So, Mayor, can you put us in the moment of what happened when you first heard about this? What were your first reactions? We had Bernie Kerik on earlier the show to kick off the show. Walk us through what were the first impressions on the start of this.
Well, I was having breakfast at the Peninsula Hotel. Thought it was going to be a quiet day. It was primary day in New York, and all of a sudden, one of my police officers came in and said that a twin-engine plane had hit the North Tower. We walked outside to go down there, saw a beautiful, clear day, concluded it couldn't be an accident. It must be either a terrorist attack or some kind of a strange revenge attack. And then I started rushing there. I could see the tremendous flames. It didn't look like it was just a twin-engine plane. And then a big explosion, and that's when the second plane hit. And my police commissioner, Bernie Kerik, called me and said, "Boss, this is a terrorist attack." And we closed down immediately the bridges and tunnels because we had no idea if it was going to be only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. We began dispersing the police to the areas we thought they would hit next. I got there. I walked to the fire department command post, which was right below the North Tower, and I saw the most horrific experience of my life. Seeing in my life, I saw a man jump from the 100th floor all the way down and get crushed when he hit the ground. I saw people getting hit with debris, some of them being knocked down. Then I got to the fire command post, and we organized the division of labor between fire and police. And then it was just a incredible day of horrible things that happened and tremendous bravery. We went to a new command post that we built very quickly. The police department got it up in 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden the first building came down and crushed us. And we were stuck there for about a half hour. The governor thought we were possibly killed, and so did others. And we got out of there, and then joined Governor Pataki, and made a very fateful and important decision, which is we decided to run our governments together until the crisis was over. That meant that every day we held our staff meetings together, so there wouldn't be any separation and no delay. And I think that was probably the key to why it was such a really excellent recovery effort that could have been a disaster, because the recovery was just as dangerous as the attack. There were fires below the ground of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That went on for about a month. So you made one mistake and you were basically going to hell. So it had to be done, with perfect execution. We also, the slurry walls that hold up Lower Manhattan were breached, which meant if we had had a big rainfall or a hurricane, God forbid, all of Lower Manhattan would have been flooded. We had to get that fixed in 3 weeks. Every day you prayed for no rain. And, just something current now. Those are things I didn't share with the people in New York completely. I didn't want them to panic. They never knew about the slurry wall. I'm not sure they even know about it now. If you go to the museum and you go downstairs, you can actually see them reconstructed. But if there had been heavy water coming in, that's below sea level. That financial center is below sea level. All of Lower Manhattan would have been crushed.
Mayor, we have about 90 seconds left. We'd love you to stay over. We know you're jammed for time. But was there any moment in that morning when you thought that this was going to be the end, that you were going to die down there?
Yeah, when we were in the building, I thought we would when we couldn't get out, and then when we did get out and we decided to go outside, I thought some of us would be killed. But I decided to get us out of the building. There were about 40 of us, because I felt in the building, if it crashed down, we'd all die, and outside, maybe 5 or 10 of us would get hit. Luckily, we all made it, but yeah, there were a couple of times I thought I would die.
Mayor, I got to tell you, I know America, you became not just America's mayor, you became the world mayor. I've had the pleasure of seeing people from around the world meet you over the last couple of weeks. And everybody, you're immediately recognizable and a hero to many people in the world, whether those people are in China, whether those people are in Latin America or in Europe. Mayor, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I know you're incredibly busy today, but thank you for taking your time to call into War Room Pandemic and share these observations. Great honor, sir.
Steve, we'll be back. More War Room Pandemic. Jack Maxey, Stephen K. Bannon, Raheem Kassam, and all of our fantastic guests on this very special day in just a second.
with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
9/11 commemoration of the bloodiest day in American history. We're going to now have a moment of silence in commemoration of the Pentagon. 5 floors of the Pentagon collapsed after being hit by one of the airliners of radical Islamic Jihad. So we're going to take a moment of silence. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, welcome back on all of our distribution platforms, and particularly the radio audience. If you saw, they get incredible footage by America's Voice, the team at America's Voice today. It's up, and it's very powerful. I don't think we see this footage enough. In fact, I'll talk a little bit about that in the next hour, the difficulty of getting some of this footage today. I worked in the Pentagon, and I had a number of buddies who had become flag officers later. I was a naval officer back in the 70s and early 80s. And then they told me the stories of actually going and pulling the bodies out. So the Pentagon situation was horrible. We had, obviously, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The president's going to speak there today. We're going to try to go there live and get his comments. But I want to bring in, this is a day of heroes. We've had Bernie Kerik. We've had Mayor Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor. We've had Buck Sexton, who volunteered to go to the CIA after that. And now we've got a true American hero, Scott Neal, Master Sergeant Scott Neal, one of the horse soldiers, one of the guys who went over and set things right out of the box. Master Sergeant Neal, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us about, before we get to your exploits in Afghanistan, tell us about the day that this happened. Where were you? What was the impact on you? How did that change your life?
So I was already in the Army Special Forces at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and it was about 7:30, 6 in the morning, and we had been in a 3-day exercise replicating an attack on the United States. We were already getting ready to go on 1 October to be ready in the Middle East, and so I had different elements all over the country, and they were reporting back on this kind of mock scenario. And the intel sergeant came in and he wrote on the board that the World Trade Center's been hit. We thought that was very strange. Okay, part of the exercise in play. And then about an hour later, he came in and said, no, the second World Trade Center's been hit. And it wasn't until 4 hours later that then Colonel Mulholland came in and said, stop, this is for real. And we went to the mess hall and we saw it on television like everybody else.
What were your first reactions? What were your first thoughts?
All the emotions, but quite honestly, we were already in the mindset of terrorism, right? Who had the capability, who had the desire to attack our financial institutions, our military power, the Pennsylvania was meant for the White House. We knew it right away, and by 14 October, we were getting ready to go in.
A lot of people out there may not know that Fort Campbell, Kentucky is the home of the 101st Airborne. My daughter, after West Point, was a member of the 101st out there when she deployed to Iraq. It is I think, part of the elite of the American military. Mm-hmm. Walk us through from that day to you actually going and getting in the fight. What happened? How'd you train up? And tell us about Afghanistan.
So we were already ready to go in the Middle East and be vigilant, and it just accelerated that. So in Special Forces, we're 12-man A teams, and we're designed to go behind the lines and create insurgencies and guerrilla warfare. So this obviously became the tool for us. And quickly they saw the need. I think President Bush at the time was briefed about big Army in the springtime, big Marine Corps, big armor push through Pakistan, and he really wanted a faster response. So a plan came together to send small teams of Green Beret and CIA agents and link up with the Mujahideen that had been terrorized by the Taliban with all that old Russian armor and equipment. Actually, when we started planning to the time we went in was very short, only a few days, and it was a small packet of information in a few National Geographics. That's all we had.
You guys actually the Capitol fell pretty quickly. People look back on that time as that was a smart way to fight. We're here 19 years later. We're commemorating the 19th anniversary of the bloodiest day in American history. and American forces, NATO forces, are still in Afghanistan.
Yep.
Take us back to the time. Was that did we learn the wrong lessons from what you guys did? Because I think America and the world was kind of blown away. You had guys on horses, you had guys fighting. I mean, it looked like it was just amazing. And then the Capitol fell. You kind of took the thing over in, what is it, 30 days, 45 days?
Right. So from the time we hit the ground, 19 October, several teams all around the country, we did not know where each other was in case we were captured. We had one simple mission, and that was to survive and hold out till the springtime. Well, when we linked up with the Mujahideen fighters, they were ready right then and there. And we went from 30 horsemen to 300 horsemen to 3,500 cavalry and 1,000 infantry in less than a week and a half. And we started attacking the Taliban formations using the might of our Air Force and our partners. And it created this momentum that nobody expected. And we quickly wiped out the Army of the North. Different teams came into the capital city, retook the embassy, and it happened so fast that nobody understood the speed of warfare. And finally, it came down to Kandahar, which was the heart of the Taliban. And probably by mid-December, right, we were then just doing special operations and finding the remnants of Taliban leadership. And Al-Qaeda had pretty much fled, and we had boxed them into Tora Bora. And really, that was it. I mean, it was a very short cycle.
Scott, we're going to take a break here in a minute, but we would love for you to hold over. The audience already has blown us up a number of questions. One thing, though, right before we go, you talk about horse soldiers. I don't think there have been a cavalry charge until the end of the Indian Wars. I mean, you're going back over 100 years. You guys took the capital city, and you were essentially a cavalry unit up on not the Army cavalry unit up on tanks and Humvees, a cavalry unit on the good old horse. Listen, we got to go. I want to get this after the break because I want to give the answer. Our audience does. Master Sergeant Scott Neal from Special Forces, the 101st Airborne out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, was one of the horse soldiers that took the capital, Kandahar, and by mid-December had the Taliban kind of boxed up and Osama bin Laden up there in Tora Bora. We're going to get to all of that. We got Sam Faddis, we got Bo Dietl, we got nothing but heroes on this show commemorating 9/11. War Room Pandemic, Stephen K. Bannon. Raheem, can you take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve will be back very shortly, as you said, with pleased to have and understand they're so busy today. We're just so grateful for their stories. We'll be back. More War Room Pandemic in just a second.
virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the U.S.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't, and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic here on this auspicious occasion where we gather together to remember the stories and the heroism of those that not only just sacrificed so much on that day 19 years ago, but the legacies of them since and everything that's being done to help the people that suffered as a result and are still suffering in many cases as a result. There is just some amazing charities and work out there that's being done to make sure that people who are affected by 9/11 are taken care of. And Mayor Giuliani, I know, is a part of one of those. He was on the show in the first hour here today. But just before I throw it back to Steve, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what it was like looking at this from the other side of the Atlantic, from one of America's strongest and staunchest allies in the United Kingdom. I was just 15 years old, I think I was, but watching the scenes as I came home from school, given the time difference, as the news was rolling on this, and just feeling this sense of hollowness and great disturbance about how our most powerful ally, how a nation that we all look to as kind of this umbrella over Europe could be attacked on its homeland, and obviously seeing the scenes of great human just sacrifice, but also just destruction, and it was. I mean, I remember I was absolutely glued to the television set all day for the next couple of days. I remember my mother even telling me, turn it off. You're gonna disturb yourself. But it was one of those moments, and it meant so much to hear from Buck Sexton in the last hour as well, talking about this feeling that he had that he needed to do something about it. And as the audience will probably know by this point, I soon after dedicated the entirety of my 20s to tackling radical Islam and exposing these jihadist networks all the way across Europe and the Western world. So for me, it was as formative a moment as well. Steve?
No, I know, Raheem. Your work has been incredible over the decades. But one of the reasons we want to do this show, this is the signal, not the noise. People are saying, "Why are you taking all 2 hours and doing that? There's so much stuff going on." But that stuff will all be there, tomorrow, be there the next day. We've got to go back and focus on what is important. That's why today we've had about the heroism and sacrifice, both on that day and the days thereafter. We've had Bernie Kerik, the NYPD police commissioner, Mayor Giuliani. We had Buck Sexton, who dedicated his life as a young college student on that day, a New York City guy that went to the CIA and then NYPD. Intelligence unit. Later, we're going to have Sam Faddis from the CIA, Bo Dietl from NYPD, some other special guests in the second half. If we don't remember what it was and what the courage it took, not just on the day of 9/11, but the days thereafter, we're going to lose it as a nation. This is absolutely essential that we understand this and where it came from. I want to go now back to Master Sergeant Scott Neal, Army Special Forces. He was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st on the day that this happened, and he was deployed pretty quickly to Afghanistan. So, Scott, here's what blew people away in that troubled fall. You really gave, it was kind of analogous to Doolittle's raid after Pearl Harbor. You guys hit so quickly. It wasn't Big Army. As much as I love Big Army and much as I love the big Marine Corps, and I'm a naval officer. So you guys, I think what people were most stunned about when the images first came in, they said, this looks like, Phil Sheridan or George Armstrong Custer or one of the, guys from the 1870s. You actually have Army officers, CIA jawbreakers, etc., working with the Northern Alliance, working with these these disparate freedom fighters in Afghanistan to really not just round up the bad guys, but actually take the capital and kind of start the beginning of securing the country. So walk us through, how did the whole concept of getting up on horse and actually doing it as a cavalry unit, how did that come about?
Well, it became a reality on the ground that the Mujahideen fighters were pushed from their villages in the mountains. And just like our own American Indians, they had to survive and utilize the terrain. And the Afghan horses were remnants of the Mongols, right? They were very scraggly ponies. They basically had a carpet and a piece of wood for a saddle, but they were fearless, right? They had righteousness, they believed, on their side. And the enemy of our enemy is our friend. When we went there and told them we deserved our revenge because they're very tribal, they rallied around us, and they were always leading the charge and very fearless. What became unique, though, is imagine calling in and reporting you're just on the ground, and the first thing you ask for is horse feed and saddles. And at the time, communication was very sparse. We didn't have enough radios. And, it came from all around, and just the logistics now to train, advise, and equip a rebel insurgency army, because that's what it was at the time. The Taliban had the cities, they had the tanks from the Russians, they had artillery, they had every piece of armor or equipment. And, what we had was the desire to win. And so militarily, luckily, Mark, the commander, he studied the Civil War cavalry charges. He studied Pancho Villa and the charges. He studied in the Philippines one of the last cavalry charges, and he knew the tactics. And we began to outmaneuver our enemy, which is sound military tactics. And we just kept on them, relentless pursuit. And we overwhelmed them, so much so that the leaders started to flee, and the Taliban, which were really simple farmers, thought they were cowards, so they began to desert very fast. So our psychological operations started working, and it was momentum that won the day.
Okay, so roughly around Labor Day, shortly after Labor Day, the attack happens. But by Christmas, we've essentially taken Kandahar with this small unit of Army Special Forces and CIA paramilitary, and with allies you guys have kind of picked up on the way.
Yeah.
You also box in the real bad guys up in Tora Bora, up in this in the Hindu Kush Mountains, which is some of the most forbidding territory on earth, the Hindu Kush mountain range. The question people have is that, having done all that in a lightning strike and actually boxed Osama bin Laden in, what happened that we didn't finish it? What happened that we didn't finish it right there? What happened at Tora Bora?
Well, I think, now we can look back and reflect. And I was there at the time, and I remember the 101st Airborne, General Petraeus, wasn't even coming in yet. And so we really didn't have that kind of blocking force you needed. And the winter was starting. So we tried to rely on the Mujahideen fighters, but, bin Laden and his network was also very tribal related. I think that confusion and that kind of pause in pursuit led him to escape. And if you think about what happened later that spring was Anaconda, we finally cleaned up the remnants that were hiding out up there. But, out of all of these successes, everybody always asks, why did we throttle down and hesitate? And, we're going to analyze that. But it was the terrain, and we weren't ready to commit maybe 4,000 airborne troops on every ridgeline and mountaintop to kind of seal it in. And so, we lost the opportunity. With the I'm so sure the surge of pride and mission accomplishment you and your colleagues had in right before Christmas, when actually Kandahar fell, and you had essentially tactical control of at least that part of Afghanistan. At the time, with that surge of pride, would you have ever envisioned that being on a show 19 years later, that combat troops would still be in Afghanistan? Well, here's what I'll say is my son just returned from his year in Afghanistan. I'm good friends, and served with the commander of Afghanistan, who his son served as well. So we've seen to turn this generational fight over to our children. I spent some time in 2010 and 11 on the battlefield as one of the counterinsurgency advisors, talking to the Mujahideen commanders, talking to warlords, political leaders, talking to the Taliban. And it's for them, this has been all of their lives, right? And now we continue to kind of share this conflict with them. So I don't know how you almost have to say this is enough and withdraw. Taliban was part of the fabric of Afghanistan. I think there could be a place, but right now, just the amount of treasure has lingered in Afghanistan. It should be a glowing, shining example, but it's not.
Scott, how old was your son on September 11th of 2001? Your son just spent...
My second oldest son at the time, he was probably 3 years old. It's interesting, if you don't mind me saying, I just briefed West Point about, unconventional warfare earlier before COVID. And in the audience is all the young and brightest of America sitting there. You have your plebes all the way to your seniors about ready to deploy. And I asked them a very simple question. Who was born before 9/11 and who was born after? And what you see today, those serving, almost half were born after 9/11.
No, it's absolutely incredible. My daughter is a 2010 grad, and she spent her year turning the barrel in Iraq, which we'll get to on some other day. But Scott, I want to ask, I know the audience is blowing our phone up about your colleagues, the guys who were there with you this day. Tell us, what are you still close together? What are you guys doing? And do you think there's been, I know there's a movie out, but do people you think really know, does America really understand the story of the valor and the heroism of the horse soldiers?
I don't think they do. There's a documentary called Legion of Brothers. It was us reflecting in our wives, right? Because this impacted our family too. It's very emotional. We lost some brothers along the way. One thing that's true is you retire or you leave the military and you have to transition. And as a group of friends who went through this, and we went through Iraq, we were the first ones into Iraq. I served at the end of my career as the senior listed advisor to the director of the Interagency Task Force for Counterterrorism. That's where I spent a lot of time in New York City and Washington, D.C. But then one day you're suddenly nobody, and nobody in your own community knows your story, which is okay. We're Green Berets, we're quiet professionals. But how do you live that American dream you've been defending? So we all, started a small business that's grown very well, and we actually make bourbon called Horse Soldier Bourbon. And this started before the movie or any recognition. We knew that if we just put our skills together and we kept ourselves, together as friends, we could build a great business. So it's going well. We're in, multiple states. We're actually building in Kentucky on the Cumberland, and that's where the team came out of water during the training of 9/11. So we're almost full circle, right? We're back in the economy. Our children are serving, and we're contributing to society.
Well, it's nothing better than what Kentucky bourbon made from the pure waters of the Cumberland. How do people get access? How do they get to the website? How do they find out about the bourbon, and how do they find out more about you? What's your social media handles?
Right. So it's very easy. It's Horse Soldier Bourbon. So horsesoldierbourbon.com. It's the same thing in Facebook and in Twitter. It's interesting being secret all your life, and now you have to expose yourself on social media. But really, our story is very simple. We're all American. We are authentic, and the bourbon is really good. So, it's a testament, though, that you can come back home, and you can, like the greatest generation, start your own business.
Scott Neal, thank you very much. You're an American hero. Our audience, lighten up today with you and your brothers. Thank you very much, Scott. Master Sergeant Neal, Green Beret, 101st Airborne, one of the horse soldiers. Okay, we're going to take a short commercial break. Raheem, I'm going to toss it back to you. We want to hear everybody. Hashtag War and Pandemic. Comments, observations, questions. We still have two more incredible Americans. Sam Faddis from the CIA, Bo Dietl from NYPD, two other heroes. And also we're going to have, I think, a special guest from some of the commemoration ceremonies going on in New York City today. Raheem, back to you.
Oh, sorry, Steve. I was busy on the Horse Soldier Bourbon website, just perusing their what's in stock. So I'll make sure I grab some in the break. Hashtag War and Pandemic returns. Jack Maxey, Stephen K. Bannon, Raheem Kassam. More guests over the course of the rest of this hour. Make sure you're hitting those like and share buttons so everybody sees this special. We'll be right back.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room. Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back. It is the 19th anniversary of the bloodiest day in American history. We've had a day of heroism and bravery from Mayor Rudy Giuliani to NYPD Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik, to Master Sergeant of the Horse Soldiers Scott Neal, Buck Sexton, who dedicated his life, went to the CIA and NYPD intelligence unit after being having an impact of his city being attacked. Now I want to bring in a guy who's not just brilliant but also controversial, former CIA officer Sam Faddis. Wrote an amazing book years ago called Beyond Repair about the CIA. Sam, where were you on this day 19 years ago, sir?
I actually had just come out of the field. I was in headquarters, hating life because nobody wants to be stuck in Washington, D.C., and heard people outside my office talking about a plane just hit the World Trade Center. Went out and saw it on television like everybody else, and as soon as the second plane impacted, had the same thought, I guess, as most of the rest of America, which is that's not an accident, and instantaneously I said to myself, that is Al-Qaeda.
Sam, you were at Langley that day at headquarters, and you're an American patriot. Your book that you wrote years later kind of was very critical. You had a kind of a before and after. Walk us through the Central Intelligence Agency before. How did we miss this? And what happened afterwards? We've already had Buck Sexton and then Scott Neal, who worked with CIA paramilitary. The horse soldier actually took Kandahar in, I think, 60 days. So walk us through the before and after of the Central Intelligence Agency regarding 9/11.
Right. Well, I was working counterterrorism for years before 9/11, and myself and any number of other individuals, I don't want to single myself out, had been saying for a long time that this is coming. I don't mean like specifically what happened on 9/11, but that Al-Qaeda means what it says, and we are at war already. And headquarters did not want to hear that. Washington, D.C. did not want to hear that. A whole succession of operations were put together and proposed to go deal with the threat before 9/11, including probably most famously an operation to go into Afghanistan and either kill or capture bin Laden at a facility at Tarnak Farms. Every one of those operations was turned down for a variety of reasons, essentially too risky, not politically acceptable. So we watched.
Let me ask you, the CIA that was on top of things, it was that we didn't have the political will to actually pull the trigger, so to speak. Was the CIA also kind of asleep at the switch that we didn't see this coming? Or because those are kind of political decisions. You guys were ready to go. At Tarnak, I think that I believe part of that was was where they did the Falcon. I know one of the places you had a big Falcon hunting thing that you guys had these guys all set up with other Gulf Emirate princes that were financing them and could have taken out the whole lot, but it was waved off by more senior political people. Was the CIA at fault for this, or was this just we didn't have the will to actually understand what the enemy was?
Yeah, all of the above. There's no question that the CIA was not doing what it needed to do. Once you go into this mode where things are not acceptable, where we're not going to take this risk, the rank and file does not then just continue to march and continue to propose operations across the board. People get the message, things shut down, the risks are not taken. So those operations that were still percolating to the top are really a demonstration of the fact that there were guys and gals out there who were basically saying, look, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm going to put this op together anyway and try to get you to do the right thing, even though probably at some risk to their careers for doing so.
Now, after we realized that the radical Islamic jihadists were prepared to kill us and prepared to kill us in large numbers, this being the bloodiest day in American history, did the CIA change? Did you get a sense that people understood we were on war footing and we had to take the torch to the enemy?
Well, there has definitely been a sea change. Would I say it has been sufficient? No, but yes, the day after 9/11, people were proposing operations and launching operations that you would have been laughed out of the room for 24 hours earlier. I had folks come to me 24 hours after 9/11 wanting me to help them recontact a source inside Al-Qaeda that they had made me terminate 3 years before as being too risky, asking me where they could find this guy. And I had to explain to them, we don't exchange Christmas cards. We don't keep in touch. You made me cut him loose. I have no idea where he is, probably planning the next attack on America.
Sam, how are we, with the great work the CIA paramilitary did, the horse soldiers, special forces, all of that, how are we 19 years later, Scott Neal's son, who was 3 years old, just finished a year in Afghanistan. How does that work? What is the CIA or the military not doing correctly? Is this a political problem, a political will? Why have we not been able to solve this problem?
Well, Steve, look, I think we have the same problem in Afghanistan that on some level we had in Iraq, right, which is mission creep, which is forgetting why you went. We didn't go to Afghanistan to transform Afghan society and turn it into Switzerland and Central Asia. We went to destroy it as a launching pad for attacks in the United States. We did that in maybe the most brilliant campaign since the Second World War in almost no time at all. The only objective then is to leave a friendly government in place and go home. Instead, we moved on to all sorts of other things that had nothing to do with that original mission. And yeah, now almost 2 decades later, with all that blood and treasure, we are facing the fact that that was the wrong move. Same as in Iraq, I would suggest to you. The only job left to be done after Saddam was gone was somebody to take power who's friendly to the United States. Don't try to transform Iraqi society or fix 1,500 years of animosity.
Sam, I've only got a couple of minutes, so two topics I want to talk about. One is the CIA in China. It seems to me that we've had and I'm a big believer that this was a biological weapons program, this COVID virus. And I think you're going to hear Dr. Yan and others coming out in the next days and being able to tie the knots together, some of these defectors from mainland China. Has the CIA missed it on China? Was there too much time spent on Afghanistan and Iraq and focus on the radical Islamic Jihad, where they missed maybe the biggest existential threat the United States has ever had, and particularly in this biological and chemical weapons program that the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA have?
Yeah, well, there's no question we missed the boat on China, whether that's because we were too busy in Afghanistan or that's because politics has sort of taken over at CIA headquarters. That's another topic. But I mean, we should have had that lab, all those labs in Wuhan, wired backwards and forwards. We should have known precisely what was going on. We shouldn't be guessing 6 months later what happened to us.
Sam, you've written a brilliant piece in The Revolver. We're going to have you back on next week to go into more detail because we don't have enough time now. But just briefly, you're very concerned about what you're seeing going on today in the streets of America. I know Raheem's got some updates, but just tell us briefly, what's the piece? We're going to have you next week to talk about it.
Right. Well, essentially, the thesis of the piece is, look, this is not peaceful protest, and this is not people who want to make marginal changes around the edges. What's happening here is we have a full-blown Marxist insurgency on the streets of our country being directed by folks who have been working this problem for decades. And we need to face that and respond appropriately.
You're saying we have a Marxist insurgency. You, a career CIA officer, saying we have a Marxist insurgency on the streets of America.
Yeah, without question. And I don't use that term as a throwaway or cavalierly. I mean that precisely. One of the groups involved here is the Revolutionary Communist Party of the United States. They have a proposed constitution for the new Socialist Republic of the United States, which reads like something that came straight out of the USSR, literally dictatorship of the proletariat, no private property, etc. There is no ambiguity. I mean that term exactly the way I intend.
Jack and Raheem in studio, I know that you've got some observations on Sam's piece in Revolver. By the way, Revolver, one of the best sites out there, the Counter Drudge. Got about 2 minutes left. I don't know if you have a question for Sam, but I also know you have some new reporting or some things you're working on, Raheem.
Jack, anything from you?
Yeah, Sam, I was curious. I read both your books, actually. Great stuff, particularly the original one on the CIA, which really had an impact on my understanding of foreign policy. But as you're describing what's going on in the streets here as a Maoist insurgency, what is the role of our intelligence services, particularly the domestic services like the FBI and others, in terms of getting their arms around this? And are they doing the job that they're supposed to be doing?
Look, with all due respect to the average folks that are in the FBI who are great people and trying to do God's work, the answer to that question is no, obviously. You can't have a gigantic communist insurgency grow and be launched on our soil, and we are apparently surprised by it, and we apparently find out which city is going to go up in flames next when it happens. You can't possibly have that and conclude that we're collecting the intelligence internally that we should. When I think the reality is we're lucky if we have a half dozen sources nationwide inside this entire movement.
So what are your solutions to that? What should we do to counter?
Well, we have an entire national security branch in the FBI, which is essentially supposed to be our version of MI5, domestic intelligence collection. Make them do their job. Now, I suspect what you're going to find very quickly is that they are blocked every time they attempt to do their job on domestic terrorism and insurgency by the Department of Justice. So, therefore, Attorney General Barr needs to make that change. He needs to issue whatever direction and orders and fire whoever he needs to fire. And the FBI needs to get out and get after it. These guys should not be able to move on our turf without us knowing before they do what they're planning on doing. That's the way this works.
Sam, where can people follow you?
AndMagazine.com.
All right, we'll make sure we get up all the links to the War Room and to the War Room audience. Sam Faddis, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be right back with more War Room Pandemic.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
On a commemoration of the 19th anniversary of the bloodiest day in American history, we have a day of heroes and sacrifice. Rudy Giuliani, Bernie Kerik, Buck Sexton, Master Sergeant Scott Neal, Sam Faddis from the CIA. We're now going to bring in somebody, one of the most decorated officers in the NYPD's history. He was an iron worker on the actual construction of the World Trade Center. He's a New York City guy, born and bred, Bo Dietl. Bo, one of the things we always pride ourselves in having the signal, not the noise. The reason we wanted to dedicate 2 hours of the show today, our entire show on this commemoration, is actually show how far we've come. And I don't know if that's all positive. I'm back in New York City, wanted to do it live here, and I'm stunned by how this city is really zombie land. It's more shut down than right after 9/11. It's like from a science fiction movie. We're right after Labor Day, and there is nothing happening in New York City. And I don't think the rest of the nation fully appreciates what the economic and cultural and societal impact that is going to have. So I know you know New York better than anybody. Tell us what's going on.
Start with about New York, what predicament that we're in right now. We have a useless, reckless mayor that has destroyed my city. I have my offices at One Penn Plaza, right across from the Madison Square Garden. 3 weeks ago, we had 2 homicides on each corner. Right now, you have bands of criminals, the same 5% that revolve in and out of the police department. As they get arrested, they get released automatically. You have district attorneys supported by George Soros for bringing his own DAs. So this way, we have this crime element that is really backed by one thing. These are communist socialists that want to take our country down. They're hiding behind this other bull crap, Black Lives Matter nonsense, and what they're doing is they're destroying our countries, our cities, all across America. And the real part that really upsets me, today, 19 years after 9/11, they don't even teach it in New York City schools that it even happened. It's an erase. They erase it out of our society. What they're starting to teach now is about 1642 was the beginning of America with the first slaves, and they've redirected our children. I'm talking about grammar school children, and not just high school or colleges. They are now poisoning our children with what they want to teach them, that socialism is the way to go. And it's a horrific thing as far as all the men and women that gave up their life for this country. And when you got these sports figures that will not stand for our national anthem, I will not watch basketball nor football. It's a disgrace. And I really am so angry on the day of me having feelings about losing a lot of my friends at 9/11.
Bo, let's talk about that. The valor and heroism. We asked Bernie Kerik at the top of the show, where did that come from? Where did that kind of guts and pride of country and service to your fellow man? Where did that come from? And do you think we're starting to lose that?
Well, you know what the problem is? The police department in New York City has been totally taking their heart and soul out of it. You have officers that are not supported when you got a moron governor, Andrew Cuomo, a complete moron that has passed this bail reform. Initially, it was supposed to be for pot, that they don't have no bail. And then it progressed itself into shootings, robberies, guns. Now there's no bail for anything. It's the same 5% of criminals that keep revolving out. Now you have a city council of a bunch of morons there that passed a law. You have to be able to arrest somebody without touching their chest, without touching their back, without getting them in a headlock when you're fighting with them when they're resisting arrest. So they want you to levitate maybe 6 foot off the ground and drop the handcuffs down. That's exactly it. And they threaten the cops, if you are deemed that you used excessive force, you will be arrested and you will lose your pension. So now you have cops that do not, I talk to them every day, that are not getting involved because they have no support from a police commissioner, a moron governor and his moron wife, and this is what's running the city. Yesterday they had 160 CEOs of major corporations in New York actually begging the mayor, please combat the homeless with the crime situation. We have to beg this big bird punk mayor to do his job. This is disgusting. And New York City now has become worse than Detroit. It's horrific. All the real estate values have gone in half down. Commercial real estate, residential, everyone's moving out. And where's the money going to come for the taxes when the people are all gone? It's horrible.
I want to ask you, Bo, a couple of weeks after these horrific attacks, the bloodiest day in American history, you could feel the energy of New York City starting to come back. You could see the grit and determination that really put 9/11 in back of people and got this city back up on its feet amazingly quickly. I came back here this week to kind of do the show and to work with Miles Bowe on some anti-CCP things. And I am absolutely stunned. We're in Midtown Manhattan. There's nobody here. I mean, it's like a zombie movie. It's like a science fiction movie. Tell America, because I don't think this is not being reported by mainstream media. New York City. It is not.
Yeah. And what's happening in New York, it's like Walking Dead. Remember the series about zombies? You could go down 34th Street and you could walk around and you'll see sights. You have people having sex on the street, going down the stairs to the subway having sex, homeless people having sex with each other, dirt, grime people. Give me some money. going into people's faces. Then the only thing is they have outdoor dining, people coming up to you, spitting in your food, throwing your glasses. This is my home, my house. And effectively, they have taken my city that I loved. I was hospitalized 30 times when I was a New York City cop and detective. My city that I love, this punk Mayor de Blasio, and I'm just so angry on a day like today to remember what happened on that day, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But right now, after 9/11, we were shocked. I'm more shocked now what this mayor has done to New York City. I am so angry about what he's done to our beloved city. We came back from the largest terrorist attack ever on this country, and we were strong. We fought together. We'd be at Yankee Stadium. God Bless America would be sung there, and everybody held their arms together, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, that whole thing now is at one division. Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. And now this has been hijacked by the socialists, and you can see this new Africana group of socialists. They're all white. They're not even African Americans, and all they want to do is destroy, and they're hiding it behind this whole Black Lives movement to riot, burn, and rob and destroy people.
So, Bo, we got a couple minutes left. How 19 years ago, obviously you would have never imagined after those horrific attacks that New York City would come back that quickly, but particularly 19 years later, we'd be both in Afghanistan and New York City would be a zombie land. How do we turn this around? You're a New York City guy. You're an iron worker on the building of the World Trade Center. You were one of the most decorated cops in NYPD history. You were there the entire time. What is your proposal? What's your solution for where New York City is?
First of all, the biggest proposal, biggest solution is whether you like Donald Trump or not. I know him 45 years. Yeah, Donald said Donald can be a narcissist. Donald could be hard. Donald could tell some fibs. Definitely he can, but what you have to realize, he gets things done. If you don't like Donald Trump, hold your nose and press the lever or vote for Donald Trump. If he doesn't get reelected, we are going into the sewer deeper and deeper. Because right now you've got a man named George Soros putting billions of dollars into all these groups, including district attorneys who are socialist district attorneys. He funds these people. And when you get that moron AOC over there, he funds all these people. He is to have one thing in mind. He wants to destroy America. Right now, we have to get this president elected. All my Democratic friends, this is not maybe. This is your life, your children's life, and your grandchildren's life. And the day of 9/11, when I went down there with my partner, we were down there for days. When I saw these heroes that ran into those buildings while everybody else was running out, and all the death that was there, and how quickly people forget, and how dare these socialist son of a guns, they don't even teach it in our schools that kids can remember it. They're running some other bullcrap, is that you got to be guilty because you're white. I mean, how ridiculous. Where are we going to stop this? If anything, we must all vote. I don't care if you like the guy or not. You got to vote Republican. We certainly have to hold the Senate, and we have to try to take the House back. The most important thing is Donald J. Trump. We got to get reelected.
Bo, before we let you go, how do you get to people are already lighting us up? Tell us about how do you turn around New York City? The President of the United States can't really do that. I mean, he can assist.
I hate to say it, but and I'm not going to say it publicly. But I think you know what I'm thinking, Steve. That would be the greatest thing that could happen is what you're thinking, what I'm thinking. And in reality, right now, you have to progressively go after. You have to go after the governor to reverse this bail reform. That's number one. This governor has to wake up, whether someone has to slap him, wake up and reverse the bail reform. Keep bail reform for minor nonviolent crimes, yes. Then you have to have a city council that's going to support the police. Right now, we have 14 more months with this big jerk. Right now, you know who I'm looking at? I'm looking at an African-American guy who was the vice chairman of Citibank, who's a family man with a brain, who ran a business. And he loves law enforcement. He's very strong on protecting the people in New York. And his name is Raymond McGuire. He would be the answer to me to have a black mayor of New York City that is for law and order and bring our strength back, bring our values, and bring our support for the police of New York City. That's how you have to bring it back. As far as de Blasio goes, he couldn't take a dirt nap fast enough.
Bo, how do people get access to you on social media, website? To our audience.
Well, my biggest thing is it's Bo@investigations with an S.com. We own the site investigations.com, and I'm all over this social media stuff. But in reality, anybody who wants to get me is BODIETL, and that's my name, and you can find me everywhere. And you know what, Steve? I'm so happy to talk to you, and God bless you, man. You know what? You keep fighting, and you keep fighting. And also, I support what you support as far as taking down China, because China is our biggest enemy alongside of Soros. That could be a nice double trip.
A nice package deal. Bo Dietl, American hero, thank you very much for joining us today on War and Pandemic.
Love you, Stephen. I'm glad to talk to you, my friend.
Okay, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raheem, Jack, observations on the fire of Bo Dietl and about the situation in New York City.
Well, there is a Soros China package deal. It's called the Transition Integrity Project, and you want to talk about taking that down. We will have exclusive reporting, really tying it up to the highest levels that people could possibly imagine. The Transition Integrity Project coming out in the next couple of days, so people are going to want to be paying very close attention to that. But I do want to just quickly give a shout out to Bo, and his passion is so evident. It's so obvious. If most people had 10% of the passion of Bo Dietl, I'll tell you, we'll be in a very different place.
Yeah, listen, Bo Dietl speaks for me, I can tell you that, and I think he speaks for a lot of the Americans who are out there. People are frustrated. Look at Bo. He's a regular guy. He's served his country, served his city, and he still continues to serve, and I think he expresses the feeling that I feel, and certainly I hope that millions of other Americans feel, because we are in the fight for the life of this republic.
All right, we're going to do a quick break now, Steve. We'll be back with more War Room Pandemic. Want to hear from the audience in the live chat. I notice the Facebook live chats are getting more and more fiery as well, so paying close attention across the board. Make sure after this show you're sharing it out on the podcast, subscribing, leaving a review, making sure other people see it. We'll be back in just a second.
with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the 19th anniversary of the bloodiest day in American history, the commemoration on War Room Pandemic of 9/11. We got two very special guests I want to get onto it. But Raheem, I think we got some breaking news. What did Mayor de Blasio do now?
The New York City Office of Emergency Management has announced that the F-18 U.S. Navy flyover scheduled for this afternoon in New York City has been canceled. Now, there's no detail coming out, but yesterday, Mayor de Blasio declared that he thought this was totally inappropriate. The leftists in New York City expressed their discomfort with this display of aggression, etc. This shows you the depth of the kind of problem that we have in these blue cities across America.
And just to add to that as well, Max Rose, who's recently put out advertisements attacking Mayor de Blasio from the left, is actually in agreement with Mayor de Blasio. He tweeted yesterday, "Are you out of your mind? Cancel this immediately." So I think a lot of people will need to know where Max Rose stands on this.
Well, Max Rose is a combat Marine too, so we definitely want to follow up on Max Rose because he is a guy who served his country. So, yeah, no, this shows you where this part of the country is going. This is a major problem. As Sam Faddis said, we're going to have more on that. Obviously, tomorrow we have a special on the new cultural revolution in China with Miles Grover. We're going to start the show off with, hey, 9/11 happened and America went to war and put this thing to bed. What's happened with this Chinese Communist Party virus, right? We've had a Pearl Harbor here with a biological Chernobyl, and nobody in leadership is accusing the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to have a lot about that tomorrow, about new evidence coming up at the Wuhan lab. Now I want to turn to, we got two special guests. We got to rip through this. I'll do the first one. Raheem will do the second. I want to bring in now Captain Maureen Bannon, formerly of the U.S. Army, 101st Airborne, 326 combat engineers, had a tour in Iraq. What impact, Captain Bannon, did 9/11 have on you?
Well, I want to say good morning and thank you guys, and also thanks to all the heroes from 9/11 that have been on the show today. I was 13 years old when 9/11 happened, and my mom woke me up to tell me that one of the towers had been hit. I knew as soon as that happened that the military was my calling. I knew that the world was going to be changed forever, and that this was something that I wanted to pursue. So I ended up going to West Point and serving a tour in Iraq. And on my first day of my deployment was when Osama bin Laden was captured and killed.
So tell us about the kids that went to West Point with you. Were they motivated? Was it 9/11 that inspired them to go into the military and serve their country in these wars in the Middle East?
A lot of them. Some of them came from military families, but most of them, 9/11 played a huge impact. We knew, even at a young age, that the world was never going to be the same, and it was something that we wanted to pursue. We wanted to make sure that the people that lost their lives didn't lose it, that there was meaning for their lives. So, and actually, I know that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of my bosses, her husband was actually in the Pentagon on 9/11, and lost his life that morning.
Real quickly, we got to go to our other guest, but I want to ask you a question. 10 years after you went to, I think, Iraq 10 years after 9/11, and now 10 years after you were there, President Trump is trying to draw down troops. There's still going to be troops there, and there's still troops in Afghanistan. When you guys were at West Point, did you ever envision that we'd be in these wars a decade after you guys got out, which was a decade after 9/11?
I did not, honestly. I thought when we withdrew troops out of Iraq in 2011, I was one of the last units out of Iraq in 2011. I didn't think that we'd be going back in years later. I also didn't think that 19 years later we would still be in Afghanistan.
Captain Bannon, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate about the inspirational story about 9/11 and your journey at West Point.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Raheem, back to you. I know we got another special guest that's commemorating 9/11. I'm going to toss it back to you guys in the studio.
All right, thanks, Steve. We have Evie Angelakis joining us as well from the 9/11 boat parade on the Hudson River. Evie, thank you. We don't have that long, but I just wanted to ask you first off the bat, you're the founder of Immigrants for Trump. Why is this date so important to you? Why have you put this boat parade on?
Because I was here 2 years when 9/11 happened, and believe it or not, that was the day that I fell in love with New York. And until then, as a new immigrant, I really wanted to go back home. I'm sure that you understand. You immigrated here from England, so you always want to go back home no matter what. Then 9/11 hit, and that was literally the day that I loved New York, and I love the New Yorkers. And what de Blasio did by canceling the 9/11, that was a slap in the face to every New Yorker. So we said we're not going to stay idle. I co-organized it with Voters for Trump, and they were very ready to come on board, and they had the platform, and here we are. We're on Hudson River right now.
So just tell us a little bit about the event today. How many people are you expecting? What is the process today?
We're over 200 boats. I would say about 1,500 to 2,000 people. In our boat, for example, we are over 25 people. And the parade started. We had a small ceremony North Coast Marina, which is right by the side. You can see the Freedom Tower and the memorial site. Eventually, we had our observed moment of silence at 9:59 and 10:28 a.m. We had an opera singer singing live the national anthem. We did invite both campaigns to participate. None of them responded. We invited Biden's campaign as well. We wanted to do it bipartisan because I'm organizing this with the Voters for Trump, as a matter of fact, Voters for Trump of New York. But we said we decided that 9/11 should be for New Yorkers. So.
Yeah, Evie, we're up against a hard break here. I just want to ask you, where can people follow you and follow your work?
Twitter, Evie Angelakis, that's the handle, and Instagram is the same. Immigrants for Trump, actually, we're going to do a lot of things coming up to support the president, but I guess that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about the short time here. We're right at the end of the show, but we really appreciate your time, appreciate your work, and we'd love to have you back as well, Evie Angelakis. There, we'll make sure that all of her details, how you can follow her and her work, are all up there on the site. And in the live stream in just a second. I'll post it myself. In the meantime, we'll see you again for more War Room Pandemic tomorrow at 10 a.m. here on America's Voice, John Fredericks, and beyond.